Okay, so today I'm going to go over 6 rules of composition. There aren't just 6 rules of composition, there are a lot of rules of composition, and you can call them rules, or you could just call them principles or elements to create successful compositions. It's not necessarily that they are rules to follow. In fact, a lot of artists constantly break the rules of composition on purpose, and it's totally feasible. It's totally okay. But when we're beginning, we want to know the rules so that we can break them consciously and effectively. And also, we can just eliminate some tensions and some awkward moments in our drawings really quickly by following these rules. So they're more suggestions than anything else. They're more like guidelines to help you avoid some of the most obvious or biggest pitfalls when composing pictures on a 2D surface. So drawing and painting. This will help your drawing and painting. That said, you can break these rules. I break them all the time, and they're meant to be broken. They're just there to help you when you're starting out, because you might make a piece, you might make a drawing, and it's not having the effect you want it to. It's looking awkward or forced or cramped in, or there's something amateurish about it and you can't figure out what it is. Maybe running through these rules in your head will help you identify some weak spots and help you get really comfortable composing images, because if you want to make art, there's no way around composition. So I'm going to run through those right now, and I hope you can get something out of it. I didn't cover everything. For example, a very strong composition is a triangular one, and I don't believe I go over that, but you'll see it all throughout art history. It's a very strong compositional choice, so that's something you can lean on. Things like that, the golden ratio. There's things I'm not mentioning here that can be very helpful. So don't limit yourself to just this one lesson. Go research a little bit and learn more compositional tips and try to incorporate those as well. But this is a good basic, simple start to making your own compositions. So I'm going to go over 6 rules of composition. The first one, good, okay. The first one is the rule of thirds. So it is basically that if you divide your page into 3 equal sections, sometimes I'm not as good at it as I would like to be, that there are some hot spots created that are incredibly pleasing. It's a strong place to put your subject matter. So at the intersections of these 4 spots, these are places at the intersection of these 4 lines. Wow, words. At the intersection of these 4 lines, it's strong hotspots, and it's appealing. Part of this rule is that placing an object in the very center of your composition is actually not pleasing. So by comparison, let's do this. So let's say we had an apple. Okay, we're going to paint this beautiful, or sketch this beautiful apple and its beautiful shadow as it's sitting on a table. Okay, there's a couple problems with this. One, it's in the very center of your page, both vertically and horizontally. Okay, and yes, this comes out to the side, creating a bit of an unbalanced, like it causes a bit of variation, but not enough to be a successful composition. However, if instead we put the apple right here, it's kind of hard to see with my little sketch there, so I'm going to do it right here. if we put our apple in one of these hot spots, say right here, with its shadow coming out like this, it is more likely to be a successful composition. We could also enlarge it so that it takes up 2 of these hot spots. So instead, because we have to get used to drawing to fill our entire composition, to fill our entire page. We don't want all of your drawings to be these little clumps in the center of your sketchbook or the center of your page, right? With all this negative space around them. So that is the rule of thirds. It helps to put things in these hot spots instead of in the center, instead of too far in a corner, okay? Or touching an edge. Touching an edge is always awkward if you were to make this, you know, composition like that, okay? So 1 is the rule of thirds. For your note-taking purposes, just draw a rectangle, cut it into 3 sections of equal size, and then circle your happy spots where it is good to place things. This rule also works with a square composition. So take my composition over here, for example. Sorry about the shaking. Let's make it a square. This apple is in the very center of my square. It is not necessarily a pleasing composition. However, if we were to move the apple, trying to think of where to take up these sketches on my page. Let's make the same square, okay? And if we were to divide this square into thirds, the apple is better suited over here. Lots of scribbling to decide where my apple's going to go and how large it's going to be, but you get the idea. This is more pleasing. This is shadow, in case you couldn't tell. This is more pleasing than smack dab in the center, okay? Rule of thirds. Second rule is the rule of foreground, middle ground, background. So this is especially helpful when you're doing a composition involving a landscape of any kind. So foreground, middle ground, blah, 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 blah. But it works with still life as well. And what I mean by that is we have to layer things in space. So a bad example might be if you have some objects, you've got your apple. You're gonna see a lot of apple drawings, okay? Got your apple, what else? You've got your coffee cup. Okay, and you've placed them on exactly the same plane. They are side by side. So even if we add this, it helps to add this background, like the table. Let's say that was the edge of the table. That helps already because you're creating space, right? The eye automatically, when it sees a line here, says, oh, that's the back of the table. And we haven't even shaded anything. And then let's say the light source was behind. So suddenly your shadows are climbing towards us, right? That's creating something more in the foreground. But this composition would be a lot stronger if you placed one object closer and the other one farther back. So you're having a bit of a bit more distance. This one, do you see where they're placed? The bottom implies that they are placed in space. So it's not just 2 objects, one's higher. No, as soon as we start, like, the eye just fills in the gaps. So this looks to me like the apple is actually closer to us than the mug. What helps this effect is if we change the size of things. So if we want to go further back in space and we make another sphere back here, as things go back into space, they get smaller, as you well know, I'm sure. And so by making it smaller, it automatically, it could just be a smaller apple, right? But our brain just decides, okay, that's farther away. Pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. So the second rule we're going to call foreground, middle ground, background. Foreground, middle ground, background. And you don't have to have all three of these, but it will greatly improve your composition if you have, I didn't give you the example, I'm just working with still life here because a lot of our assignments are still life, but let's give you the example of a landscape, okay? So if you have a landscape where it's like, oh, beautiful mountains in the background, right? Okay. And then you also have, I don't know, a windmill. Wow. West Texas. Let's do a modern windmill with just the three. Okay. And that's also in the background. And then you add some cows and they're also in the background. There's not a lot of depth. There's not a lot of sort of complexity. So let's instead leave the mountains in the background, right? With maybe there's some trees and they just make a bit of a scumbly look on the background, right? They're just very minute shapes. And then from there, put the windmill closer forward. So let's make it middle ground windmill, okay? So it's going to even go off the page here. That is not a great windmill. Please don't judge my windmill. That's in the middle ground. It almost looks like it's in the foreground. Let's make this in the foreground because it just came to the bottom of my page. So it really is the foreground. So that's our foreground object. Mountains in the background or hills in the background with trees. Let's make our cow middle ground. Oh man, guys, I'm drawing a cow and it's just gonna be a blob, okay? It looks like a bear. You can tell I'm from Canada. Okay, we've got a bear. A bear in West Texas in the middle ground. This creates interest. We have something down here that starts down here. We've got something in the middle. We've got something in the background. You've got diversity and you've got actual three-dimensional space developing, okay? So this is what we're going for when we talk about the second rule of composition. Let's dive into the third rule, which is scale. So this one's foreground, middle ground, background. And this is our best example. So the third rule is about scale. Scale meaning size of things. It's about having variety, overlap, and not having things just touching. So we discussed that with the rule of thirds. We don't want things just touching the edge of the page. So scale and variety. These two things are the same size. This helps a little in space, right? So does overlap. So let's say you have a glass of water here. These are always my what not to do examples on the left here. My glass of water, and I've got, guess what? An apple. And what else do we want? A bowl, my little snack bowl. My snack bowl is really hard to draw. It's a weird shape. Okay. And they're all in a row and they're not very interesting. They are similar size. Well, these two especially. This one's a bit taller, so that helps a little. to give us some variety. But we really need to do some more overlapping here. So let's make our glass of water in the background. I'm gonna draw as if everything's see-through just for the purposes of laying everything in and emphasizing the overlap. So here's my glass of water. Gotta have ice in there. Okay, besides the point. Apples in front, and then we could even put the bowl back here, and it's just a little bit overlap. So the apple actually overlaps both things. We've got a couple of good things going on here. We've got our glass of water agreeing with the rule of thirds. We've got the other items placed along this line also agreeing with the rule of thirds. We've got a really interesting overlap happening. Yes, these objects are the same size, but we can still, within those parameters, we can still make a pleasing composition by layering them. Would it help to have something small in here too? Like I have no idea what this is. It's a box, it's an eraser, it's a candy, I don't know. But it's a small object. So suddenly we have a larger object, two mediums, and a small, and it's creating that scale, the variety in scale. So overlap, size, scale, and moving things around in space as we learned in the last rule. Moving on to the fourth rule. The fourth rule is positive and negative space balance. I love thinking and talking about positive and negative space. It's very appealing and it's very fun once you start to notice it. So, positive and negative space balance. Have you ever looked at one of those pictures that's black and white and it's either two faces or it's a vase? You're seeing there, you're playing with positive and negative space. So if we create a composition in which all of our things are grouped together in the center, we might have some overlap happening, but our positive negative space, let's use like a really big marker to define this. Where are my very big, handy, dandy markers? I'm gonna go grab one. So, just quickly, if this isn't dry, your positive space is the subject matter right in here. And your negative space is everything around it. Well, that's dry, that end is dry. So your negative space in this composition is everything in here. And that's not as interesting right there if we're really thinking about positive negative space. That is not as interesting as if we were to take the water bottle or the water glass right off the page. We've got the apple here and the bowl. So we've really zoomed in. And by doing so, oh my goodness, look at your positive negative space. Let's highlight the negative space this time. All of your negative space. Look at this interesting shape that it's creating at the top here. Isn't that nice? I love just looking at the difference of positive and negative space. So the shape around it is only on three sides. It's narrow up here and broader on the side. We still do have some things I would change if this was mine. Like we have an equal space here and an equal space here. It might not be the best, but positive negative space is something that will truly help to consider in your compositions. For example, the apple, look at the negative space in the first one, all the way around, very balanced, potentially stagnant and boring. And then on this one, you have this little sliver of negative space here. And then on this side, this big old chunk of negative space. So it's more variety and it can be very appealing. All right, let's move on to the fifth rule. The fifth rule is odd number of visual elements. To have an odd number of visual elements. Now this one's complex because we have a lot of different visual elements within a painting and drawing to deal with. So visual elements could be items of the same value, like lightness and dark. They could be objects of the same size or just objects in general. But visual elements doesn't have to be an object, okay? So it could be, let's say it was shadows, or let's say it was line quality, a composition that has, you know, 3 of the exact same lines going through it might not be as interesting as one that has some thick lines and thin lines. So only, let's just dive into actually drawing it. I'll probably be able to explain it better if I draw something. So an odd number. Here's a perfect example. 2 objects, an even number, 2, 4, 6, these things can create tension. We don't know what's most important. We aren't sure what to focus on, or our attention's divided. Here we have 3 objects and suddenly, for some reason, the brain relaxes a little. I have no idea why. It's just, you know, science. So here we do have 4 objects, but we have elements grouped together. There are 3 things grouped together as almost one blob here, right? See that? And one over here. And it creates some, it dissolves the tension of these 3 sitting here. So even though there's an odd number here, we have very similar visual elements. Let's draw, well, we could even, I'm trying to think. Okay, let's say it was something just like 3 paintbrushes, okay? It's kind of an interesting, kind of a weird subject matter to go into, but let's say we just have 2 in the first one. Okay, I don't know if that's dark enough for you to be able to see it. Okay, let's put a little shadow under it. Here's the second one. Okay, and a shadow under that one. 2 objects. They're interesting. It's not a horrible composition. But if we do an odd number, we will have more success. For some reason, the brain relaxes. So we've got our 1 here, got our 2 here, and the 3rd will be underneath this one. And the shadows, there's more shadows to play with, right? We've got one coming down here. The shadow of this is on that brush. Like this brush laying over this one creates a shadow. Just incorporating 3, even though I tried to keep these very similar, there's a distinct relaxation or something pleasing that happens when there is an odd number as opposed to an even number. Just accept it. That's my request, is we can keep discussing this further if you're super stumped, but otherwise just in general aim to have an odd number of things, 5 things, 3 things, etc. Elements. Okay, let's do the last one. I'm going to do it on the side here. The sixth rule is about leading the eye. So lead the eye. This is about lines. It's about movement. And it's about how, as humans, we read things from left to right. In our culture, anyway, I should say, because of our habit of reading text and books top left to right. So we usually go top to bottom and left to right. And this can differ in places where you read in a different direction. But either way, movement is important. You don't want the eye to just get stuck and just bounce between these two going, what's important here? So you want to move the eye, whether it's through lines, let's say up here. Let's say the line, we're being led into this composition from the top left, from this giant windmill that's being cut off here. It comes down, your eye comes down, and then it might catch on to the hill in the background, or it could keep coming down here too. But let's say the eye moves with this background line down to here, and then it hits our cow bear. It's totally a bear. It hits this bear and it might move. We might have something here, like a little patch of grass or something that helps move the eye back up here, so we can go whoop up this side. Or we might go from the bear and our eye might then twist this way and come down to a detail down here. But the point is, we want our viewers to sort of cycle through. You can lead someone through a work and out the side, but it is extremely successful if you can kind of trap the eye and keep it moving within. It doesn't have to go in a circular way. It can go in different directions. As I showed you, it can come down here, and then I'm going to show this with a different. We have lines directly, like this is being led by lines, and then here we are not being led by lines, we're being led by an object, one object to another object, whether even it's just the object here is just a shadow, say the dark areas. We are being led. Okay, so you can be led by line, or you can be led by shapes, or you can be led by lightness and darkness, like value. So here our eyes might come into this composition and go whoop off to the side. Here our eyes might come into the composition and go whoop, and then this catches us and it might bring us up here. We might, I don't know, we could work with wood grain on the surface. We could work with our shadows. Maybe there's a shadow being cast from a window and there's some stripes happening. Lots of opportunity there. So in terms of leading the eye, I'm not going to draw a bad example because we have some of those already, right? Where there's not really much movement going on. But let's say I'm going to try to, with my still life objects that I just happen to have set up beside me, I'm going to try to move the eye just with my shapes and stuff and such with my composition here. Okay, so we might be coming into this composition at the top through this this object right here. So we're dropping down through that object. We have this line here at the bottom of this sort of makeup container. So our eye might come down and then follow the shape of that object up into, you guessed it, our apple. Let's make it an orange. This is an orange this time. Yay. Into our orange. And it could just leave, right? Or we could maybe make the table round. And so maybe after the orange, it's somehow our eye gets kind of trapped in this curve, this arc, and it keeps going through. maybe our shadow that we add, let's say the light source is over here, maybe the shadows are what guide our eye through this. So we've got the shadow on the object itself, and then we've got the shadow that the object is casting. And so this is going to be in shadow as well, part of it, from the stack of bowl. And this will have a shadow as well. I'm seeing a lot of this direction. See how my eye is going off that way? Here's my shadow on my orange. Good news, friends. This shadow is round and it's not cut off. So maybe after our eye comes through here, it bounces around this circle and continues up. So it's just about having some consideration for how our eye moves through pieces. Our eye does not just look and stay still. It moves and bounces around the drawing. And that is the end of our 6 rules. There are a lot of ways to break these rules, and there are a lot of ways to adapt them. And of course, there are a lot more rules and considerations when you're trying to make good compositions. But this is something to get started with. It's a beginning, it's a launch point, and enjoy.